Telepathic hypnosis case study number 3. Derek was 23 years old when he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act and held in a psychiatric hospital in the UK when his family asked for help from outside the NHS. He'd been diagnosed with autism at the age of 16 and with psychosis at the age of 18. Derek had been talking about being in the dark side and saying he has a third eye. His psychiatrist saw this as evidence of psychosis, and he was prescribed 3 different antipsychotic drugs, which of course the family questioned the sense of that. A social worker who was actually involved in the process to section him said that she believed that Derek is surrounded by bad spirits and suggested that the family contact someone with specialist knowledge outside the mainstream healthcare system. His mother said she'd always had a strong feeling that her son's problems were more than being autistic or psychotic. Now, a brief summary of the case. This case file at the moment runs to 34 pages with over 10,500 words, consisting of email communications with the family and transcribed recordings of conversations with Derek. Now, in summary, he was initially accessed remotely whilst in a psychiatric hospital, where he was relieved of those entities that were exploiting his vulnerability. These were removed, and his mental state improved to the extent that he was released from hospital. Later, at home, he began to display signs of alternating personality, and his family once again asked for help. Telepathic hypnosis was used to communicate with the patient directly, and we learned that he was actively communicating with spirits because he enjoyed their conversations and treated it as a kind of hobby. Attempts were made to educate him in the correct way to communicate with spirits and to protect himself from negative forces, but he was too arrogant to listen. His case was complicated by the creation of dissociated subpersonalities. And telepathic hypnosis enabled me to communicate with him and his subpersonalities through Andrew's mediumship. Now, following the initial intervention, this is a report from the family. The day after the session you've done to assist Derek, the changes were visible. He was calm, smiling and kind, his true nature. I was impressed by the identification of a negative entity manifesting in his throat chakra. He'd had a speech impairment, and this was the first sign he presented since he was around 3 years old. It seems that most of the negative energies and entities that had been disturbing him originated when he was in hospital. He was born by forceps, and it was a traumatic birth. He had to stay in special care for a week following his birth, and he had a high level of jaundice. But this has been the only time he's been in hospital. She goes on to say, I was intrigued by the explanation of the fragmentation of personality, because this is exactly how I see Derek's difficulties. He has a pure, kind and crystalline soul. He catches a free trapped fly with so much care not to hurt the tiny insect, but something then triggers an opposite behaviour. He becomes rude, verbally aggressive, pretending to be a gangster. He talks about killing and guns. And this type of behaviour started happening from about the age of 17, although he's never assaulted anyone. As our family has never been exposed to violence or aggression, we cannot understand why he feels like that. It seems that someone else takes him over. But he's never mentioned that he hears a voice. She goes on to say, our experience with the healthcare professionals has not been easy, and I'm alarmed at the inhuman way the mental health patients are treated. They treat the condition and not the person. And the treatment is exclusively focused on chemical medication. I still feel that Derek needs the right medication, but I agree that the way the psychiatrists administer the medication can do more harm than good. And I'm now fighting to have Derek back home. This is a later communication. Derek has been home now with us for a month and he's doing well. I had to take some leave from work to be with him, but it's working well. He's been sleeping a lot and he hasn't presented any more signs of distress. He still talks about aliens from time to time and the government wanted to kill him, but it's not in the stressful and manic way he did before. So far he's doing well. So there's a bit of a conflict here. He's still showing signs of psychosis, of paranoia, and perhaps there is a genuine case of mental illness in addition to the spiritual problems, because the two reinforce each other. She goes on to say, I'm currently undertaking a master's degree in public health. Based on my own personal experience, I would like to research about other people's experience and perspectives during their adult children's psychiatric hospitalisation. I hope that I can help in some way to point to the problems and recommendations for a more humanistic approach, if that would be possible within psychiatric units. More recent communication, following more interactive work with Derek using telepathy. Derek is doing really well now. He takes part in daily activities without any prompts and his communication is improving. Comparing to the state he was in last year, it is encouraging to see him healthy again. I will always be grateful for yours and for Andrew's work. Also, thank you so much for sharing the recordings. Watching them again has been valuable to be educated about this kind of work. Well done. It is needed to educate the mental health professionals so they can offer a more humanistic approach within their services. Now, I'm going to read an excerpt from a transcript of one of the conversations I had with Derek through the medium. So this is direct communication with the patient using telepathy through the medium. I'm speaking to Andrew, the medium. What I'd like to do now is to take advantage of the opportunity whilst we're tuned in to the patient. Can I ask his higher self if we can have permission to connect directly with him? In these kinds of communications, similarly, when you're working with a patient, you have to get informed consent before you can do any work. And similarly, before we can do any telepathic work, we have to have the informed consent of the higher aspect of the patient's self, the higher spiritual self, which we call the higher self. And if the higher self refuses, we can do nothing. In fact, the higher self is so powerful, it will prevent it from happening. But on this occasion, we're granted permission. So I've asked Andrew to connect with him. And I've said, can you tell me what you're experiencing, or what the patient is experiencing, what he's feeling, how he's feeling at the moment? And Andrew, the medium, reports there's a lot of agitation. So I said, okay, well, let's get him calmed down. I'm speaking directly to the patient now through the medium. I want you to focus inwards and get to know that the negative attachments been causing problems have been removed. got nothing to fear, and he can be released from hospital soon. And I want to know what his attitude is towards being communicated with in this way by us. And the medium says he's okay with that. He's saying that he prefers the telepathic spiritual communication to verbal physical communication. He's saying that the spirit world and other dimensions are far more interesting than what he gets in what we call real life. And I say, really? But we have to live in the material world, don't we? And he says, yes. But the material world is too constrained, or constraining, too restricting, I think he means here. I now ask, is he aware of how much distress he's causing his family? And he replies in the first person, I've done it for years. And I say, well, perhaps we can bring it to his attention that he's making his own parents who gave birth to him, causing them pain and suffering. How does he feel about that? He's saying it's not his intention, but he's keen to explore other dimensions. He's saying that once you know you can do it, it becomes an addiction. So I say to the patient, well, I'd like to bring it to your attention that you're bringing a great deal of distress to your own family by doing this. So I'd like you to consider them for a moment. It may not be your intention to cause them harm, but your actions are causing them harm. He replies by saying yes. He knows that. Okay, so I say to him, what I'd like to ask you now is what... Let me rephrase that. I'd like to ask you now, what are you going to do? Are you going to allow this to continue, or are you going to consider your family's feelings towards you? Andrew is reporting here. He's saying that he's happy to consider their feelings, but he's also saying this is also a part of his hobby. And he only likes to talk to good things, but not the bad things. And I'm saying to him, okay. But are you aware that when you open yourself up and you engage in communication with spirits, that you're making yourself vulnerable and you've picked up some really nasty ones here, haven't you? Yes, he does acknowledge that, says the medium. Okay, so what are we going to do about it, working together? Now, I don't want to tell you what to do, I want to help. Because we all need to be able to communicate with spirit in a positive, constructive, helpful way, don't we? We don't want to be harmed. We don't want to harm our family. So how can we work together on this? The medium reports. He says okay. He's acknowledging and saying that he does need to change. And he's saying, maybe I need to find a group of people like you that I can talk with. Okay, good. So let's work towards that, shall we? I say to him. And we can avoid this unnecessary pleasantness in getting sent to hospital, causing the family distress. And we can develop our skills in communication in a positive way. Yes? And he replies, yes, okay. And Andrew reports he's laughing and saying that he'd like to go and do this same work that we do. So that's interesting, isn't it? He has the ability. He knows he has the ability. He can use it for the good, but he's still being very juvenile about it. I'm going to finish now with a quotation from the mother. And she says, with specific reference to the telepathic hypnosis communication, I have to say that Derek seemed much calmer soon after you used the technique. At that time, he was in a psychiatric hospital, suffering from high levels of anxiety. From the tape recording during the process that you sent me, it brought more sense to understand why he had a relapse with paranoid thoughts. And it made more sense to me than the explanation given by the psychiatrists. It's helped me to understand that there's a better way to explore with Derek what he sees and feels, instead of trying to suppress it with medication. I wish you all the success with your work. And I shall conclude the summary of the work with case number 3 there.